Hello, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm Sister Cecilia Joy, a Franciscan sister of Christian Charity, and we're here today with Father Augustine Thompson, who is the author of Francis of Assisi, a new biography. And this is an amazing book. I'm so used to reading, there's a lot of beautiful legends and a lot of beautiful legend books, but this book kind of takes the legends and goes like way deeper into all the facts, and like half the book is actually footnotes, but don't let that scare you because it's really a great book. So thank you so much for being with us here, Father Augustine.
Those who are watching should know that there is a version in paperback of the book that doesn't have all the academic material in the second half. It's cheaper, and it has a new introduction that takes into account the election of Pope Francis.
Oh, wonderful. That is really good to know.
Yeah, it's called Francis of Assisi, The Life. And it's also from Cornell University Press.
Wow, thank you so much. So talk a little bit about your vocation story.
I thought about religious life or the priesthood when I was in elementary school and middle school, but not very seriously. I'm a public, and in fact, I was a publican. I made it to St. Albert's here in Oakland to do my studies with the Dominicans. And I did decide when I was finishing high school that it was fairly clear to me I wanted to do one of two things. I either wanted to be a historian and write about the Middle Ages, or I wanted to be a lawyer. And so when I went to college in Baltimore, Maryland, by the time I got there, it had become clear to me that writing history and teaching history was what I really was interested in more than law. So I did a bachelor's and a master's there. And I had the good fortune of having a wonderful teacher who was a very distinguished medievalist, John Baldwin. And he eventually sent me off to Berkeley, which when you look at the priory in back of me, it's straight behind me about 2 miles. And there, by the time I got there, I had decided that I was going to drop out. Yes, I am a Berkeley dropout. I dropped out because in 1976, when I arrived in Berkeley, I realized that there were no jobs in higher education to teach history, much less medieval history. I went to work in a bookstore to pay off my monumental $3,000 in student loans. And while I was there, as a graduate student, many of my friends were nearly all graduate students, but they were all very serious Catholics. I'd never met young Catholics like that before. I had started to go to daily mass. And as I was working in the bookstore, through, I would say, the intercession of St. Teresa of Lisieux, God found me for a religious vocation. And instead of going back to New York to do a business degree, I came to St. Albert's, which was where our novitiate was in those days. When I was a deacon, I was brought over with my classmates to the provincial residence, our regional superior, and we were asked to dream dreams and see visions. And they said, well, what vision do you have of your service in the order and to the church? And I said, I really enjoyed my year in a parish. I was asked by the provincial, have you thought of going back to Berkeley to finish your doctorate in history? And I said, no. And he said, why not? And I said, because we don't need another historian. We already have at the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology, where I now teach. We already have 3. 2 of which, one's a layman, one's a Franciscan, and one was my teacher there, who was a Dominican. And the provincial looked at me and said, we have decided you're going back to complete your degree, if you can get the money. So I went back, and while I was finishing theology, I did the last of my coursework. I was specialized in Western European, especially Italian, and then my other field was the medieval Greece, the Byzantine Empire. And 5 days after I was ordained in 1985, I left for Italy to write my dissertation. My first 2 years as a priest was spent in Italy in a community where no one spoke English, Bologna. And I will tell you, it was a baptism by fire. I had arrived there and I was taking a language course, just starting to speak the language. And the prior came up to me and said, we have a job for you. And I looked at him in horror and he said, yes, I know you're going to say you don't speak Italian, but you speak enough Italian. You're now going to be the chaplain for an old folks home outside of the city.
Wow.
Okay. During that time, I wrote a dissertation that was about early Dominicans and Franciscans, including St. Anthony of Padua, and a revivalistic preaching campaign in the 1230s, where they all first came and preached reconciliation to warring factions, then took over the city governments and rewrote the laws. This was later published as my first book by Oxford University Press. It's called Revival Preachers and Politics in 13th Century Italy. I had a sabbatical in which I did the research for what I consider my most important book, which is called Cities of God, and it's about the religious life of ordinary lay people in 13th century Italy. I had a conference with my provincial, and he had decided, after I'd been offered a job in Rome at the Angelicum, our Pontifical University, that that was not a good idea, that it was time for me to come back and teach here at St. Albert's in Oakland. And that's where I've been for the last 10 years. So now, the story of Francis. I was given hospitality at the the Franciscan Historical Institute in upstate New York for a couple months to get started. And there I discovered Francis, whom I'd never had all that much of a devotion to. And I realized that a huge amount of work had been done on sources and editing for about 100 years, because the first biography of Francis, first modern biography, was very controversial. If you're as old as I am, in your 60s, you would remember Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. Did you ever see that horrible movie? And it's in a way based on the first modern biography that was done by a Frenchman in the late 19th century. And for what are basically kind of academic fashion reasons, people who had been studying Francis, including a number of very famous Franciscan scholars like De La Rune, had stopped studying Francis and only studied documents about Francis. In fact, De La Rune said, that we no longer believe we can know the historical Francis. We can only know what people said about him or what he wrote. We only know texts. This is something called postmodernism. I'm not a postmodernist. I'm an old-fashioned historian who believes that I can try and reconstruct the past. And all this work had been done, and it was right there for me to use. And as I began to work on Francis, I discovered somebody I'd never met before, a very different character. He's not the Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. In fact, as I think you've read the book, you know he's a bit more conflicted than the usual image. Mm-hmm. Because of the privileging by earlier writers of sources for Francis that are well after his lifetime in the early 14th century, the role of poverty, which is extremely important for Francis, takes on a dimension that it didn't. It was tied into many other things in Francis's life at his own time. And one of the things I found was that to understand his teaching on poverty, and this is, you said, what does he mean for me? For Francis, the most perfect example of poverty was that God put aside his glory and became a human being and became poor that way. Then not only that, he then offered his own life, and there's nothing poorer than losing your life, on the cross for others, and he took that crucified and glorified body and he gives it to us for food in the Eucharist. For Francis, the most perfect act of poverty is the poverty of God himself in Christ, offering himself to us as food, which sacramentalized his understanding of poverty in ways that much of the writing didn't do. Francis was always Francis was always experiencing unexpected things and trying to find out what God was saying to him. Francis didn't have instantly, which is what a number of the legends do, this roadmap of exactly what he was supposed to do. To sum up what Francis taught me, I'm going to read the last paragraph of the introduction to Francis of Assisi. In historical writing, I usually avoid suggesting what the past should mean for modern readers. But as many have asked me what I've learned from Francis, I will make some suggestions as to what he taught me as a Catholic Christian. I am sure he will teach each reader something different, so these reflections are purely my own. First, he taught me that the love of God is something that remakes the soul, and doing good for others follows from it. It is not merely doing good for others. Francis was more about being than doing, and the others whom the Christian serves are to be loved for themselves, no matter how unlovable, not because we can fix them by our good works. Second, rather than a call to accomplish any mission, program, or vision, a religious vocation is about a change in one's perception of God and creation. Above all, it has nothing to do with success, personal or corporate, which is something that always eluded Francis. Third, true freedom of spirit, indeed true Christian freedom, comes from obedience, not autonomy. And as Francis showed many times in his actions, obedience is not an abstraction, but involves concrete submission to another's will. Freedom means becoming a slave of all. And last, and I hope this subverts everything I've just said, there are no ready and clear roads to becoming a true Christian and achieving true Christian holiness. That's what Francis taught me.
Wow, thank you for reading that. And everyone, if you want to pick up either this book, or you mentioned you have the new version, the Francis of Assisi, A New Life, and is that also on Amazon?
Yes, you can order the Francis of Assisi, The Life, or Francis of Assisi, A New Biography on Amazon, but you can also order them directly from Cornell University Press. Success is something that Francis taught me not to glory in, but it might be interesting to your readers that the electronic version of the book is Cornell University Press's all-time bestseller. And the Francis of Assisi, A New Biography, the one you were holding up, is also Cornell's all-time bestseller book, having sold now over 200,000 copies.
Wow.
Which shows that it wasn't just scholars and academics who have enjoyed it. It's been very satisfying.
Yeah, I will say, because I mean, you read a lot of books in school and sometimes they're not all that interesting, but this definitely is a page turner. When I've sat down to read it, it's hard to put it down. It's really, really good. So thank you so much, Father Augustine. Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. We hope you have a wonderful and blessed day. Bye.
God bless you all.